Hey, this is your man.
Ishi Hakase.
I got something new for you. Just wanted to share. Last night, I went to see Dune in the movie theater. And if you're not familiar with Dune, it's a science fiction film based on Frank Herbert's impossibly long novel. So Dune is set in the distant future amidst a feudalistic interstellar society in which these various noble houses attempt to control planetary rights and resources. And the main resource, the spice, is only found on Arrakis. So control of this planet is coveted yet very, very dangerous. So the story explores politics and religion, ecology, technology, and human emotion as these factions confront one another in a struggle to control Arrakis and the spice. Now the spice is supposed to enhance one's mental capacity as well as be critical for space travel. So it's a very, very, very important commodity. Now Dune was once cited as the world's best-selling science fiction novel, but I can say the film, or films, they've been quite polarizing. I actually remember the mid-80s version. And keeping this in the proper context, it was released around the same time as Star Wars and Alien and E.T. and The Terminator. And most of my friends hated Dune. But I guess I was the outlier. Because in spite of the really, really long running time, I quite enjoyed it. I remember Sting. Sting was in the film. He got his ass kicked. Patrick Stewart from Star Trek Next Generation, he was in the cast. And many others, but by and large, I remember being struck by the characters having great, powerful faces and wonderful, wonderful screen presence. So when this recent version was released, I knew I wasn't going to be able to convince any of my friends to go join me. So I plunked down the $10 to go sit in a refrigerator in which I could not snack because of COVID. But mask and all, and aside from the 2.5-hour runtime, the overdramatic 5 to 7 men walking in bird formation very, very slowly, the painfully slow ascending and descending spacecraft, the pensive protagonist stare across the horizon, and of course we can't forget about the obligatory allow the sand to slowly cascade through your opening finger shot. And with all this, I actually quite enjoyed the film. So we had Aquaman, Darth Raki, he was in the film. Drax from Guardians of the Galaxy made an appearance. I didn't recognize him because he was wearing a shirt. Thanos slimmed down quite a bit, and he played an important, crucial role in the film. And Duke Atreides looked just like my friend in Ohio, Jason. So if anybody from Ohio goes to see this film, I don't think it's been released in the United States yet, but if you go see this film, you tell me that the Duke doesn't look just like Jason. I was also happy to see that some black folks finally made it to the future and having some really prominent roles. Now, during one part of the film, I looked over to my left, about 4 seats over because of COVID, and a woman was sitting there with a blanket wrapped around her entire upper body, her head tipped back like a Pez dispenser, and she was fast asleep. And I mean mouth open, gurgling sleep, like and I thought, well, okay, maybe she has insomnia. And her doctor prescribed Dune for her to get some rest. And like I said, it's very polarizing. Some will love it, some will hate it. You definitely won't be indifferent to it. But you go out there and you be the judge. And remember, this is only part 1. So when I was leaving the theater, along with the 7 other people that had actually attended, I was walking down the corridor and I started seeing all these movie posters for upcoming events, and most of them were remakes. I mean, I thought, like, what, they're doing a remake of Candyman? Okay. So I thought, why all of these remakes? Well, even though this remake of Dune, fairly recently, and then the mid-'80s version, it actually wasn't the first attempt at this film. So there was what we'll call a cult film director, Alejandro Jodorowsky, who had a very unsuccessful attempt to adapt Frank Herbert's science fiction novels to film. He attempted in the mid-'70s, and Hollywood wanted the film to be 2 hours in length. His adaptation was closer to 12 hours. And 3 years later, into production, they finally pulled the plug and the film was canceled. And I do believe there's a documentary out there that talks in length about this whole process. So we'll check that out later. But some films, and remakes in particular, they should have been canceled from the very jump. Right from the get-go, somebody should have said, this is not a good idea, and pass. I mean hard pass. So why do these producers keep proposing remakes in the first place? Is it an idea deficit? Is it a money grab? Or maybe it's just a great story to tell. And that's my opinion on Dune. On Dune, listen to me, Doom. On Dune. Freudian slip there, perhaps. See, with Dune, there's so much complexity in this series. You know, a remake gives one an opportunity to clarify key elements that may have been missed in the original. But as I said before, sometimes we just have to learn to say no. So for example, why remake Psycho? Well, somebody did in 1998. And Hitchcock, Alfred Hitchcock, he was a master. And the bar in Psycho is way too high for someone to attempt a remake. So then I thought a little more about some of the worst remakes that I've actually seen. Remakes that, in my opinion, should have not been produced. And I'll go through my list, but if you have something on your list, tell me, put it in the comments. So in 2006, they tried a reboot of The Pink Panther. And this film, quite frankly, didn't stand a chance. Those original 1960s Inspector Clouseau films, they were brilliant, and he was just a comedic genius with his timing. And although Steve Martin was very accomplished, his character just never ever lived up to the original. So Pink Panther, that's my word for you. And some of you might remember The Longest Yard. So that original film with, as Hollywood would describe, the rugged Burt Reynolds, who was a football player, and he got locked up, and he was charged with recruiting and training his fellow inmates to play a football game against the guards. And it was a very funny film. Quite a few sort of catchphrases that came out of that. When I was very young and playing football, we actually used to chant "Mean Machine, Mean Machine, Mean Machine" to get ourselves fired up. So then, when somebody says, let's do a reboot of The Longest Yard, and let's think who would be a good person to replace the roguish, rugged good looks of Burt Reynolds, one of the biggest stars in Hollywood of his time. And the name that came up was Adam Sandler. Wow. Now, in 1932, The Mummy was released and was quickly cemented as one of the best horror films in history. So you think about that sort of genre of Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman, Creature from the Black Lagoon. And then there's The Mummy. The Mummy is one of the icons of that period. And then they did a reboot of The Mummy. And I don't mean the Brendan Fraser can't ever pass up a role version of The Mummy. I'm talking about the Tom Cruise version of The Mummy, which was so bad. I actually can't even figure out some words to describe it. But that mummy was not very good. So I also remember when young, every holiday time, Ben-Hur would be on television. First part on Saturday and the second part on Sunday. And this ran on TV for many, many, many years. And we have to remember Ben-Hur won 11 Oscars. And the chariot race is one of the most iconic sequences in movie history. So why in 2016 did somebody think it was going to be a good idea to do a remake of Ben-Hur? And then, unfortunately, it turned out that Charlton Heston, in the 1959 version of Ben-Hur, ended up being a real... I'm sorry. Don't speak ill of the dead. But 2016 Ben-Hur, I have something for you. My dad told me when he was young, the most terrified he had ever been is when he snuck into a movie theater to watch the 1933 version of King Kong. And again, it's all about context. You know, to see something at that scale was pretty terrifying when you didn't have any frame of reference to something like that before. And I've always been a fan of that 1933 version, particularly because of the sort of what they were able to do with the special effects and creating that Kong model with these ball and socket joints and basically rabbit fur. So when you watch the film, you'll see that his fur is moving, and that's actually a result of the animators touching the model and the fur being moved by their hands. But it gave off a pretty cool effect. And then somebody decided in 1976 that they were going to do a remake. And this remake shifted King Kong from this kind of adventure story to, you know, all of a sudden this kind of lighthearted, you know, romance that's probably better suited for television at 9 o'clock on Wednesday. It did get some mixed reviews, and some people liked the special effects, but by and large, for me, it didn't do very much. But what do I know? It did fairly well at the box office and actually prompted a sequel, which was called King Kong Lives, in which Kong was resurrected by a heart transplant. Wow, where did they find a heart that big? And then Rollerball in 1975. That was actually a pretty cool film, and I remember like, no, you can't see Rollerball. It's too violent. But the thing that the reboot of Rollerball in 2018 missed is the original Rollerball really gave commentary to the social conditions that were happening at the time. And then this reboot just basically threw all of that out and made a Fast and Furious movie on roller skates. And if I'm going to go see something like that, I'm just going to go see Fast and Furious, because at least they're not pretending to do anything or be anything other than, you know, nonstop action for 93 minutes. And then we get to a film that I still have not been able to develop the conviction to forgive. And that is the Ferris Bueller's Day Off version of Godzilla. And Godzilla goes back to all the way to 1954. It's one of the biggest film franchises that we have. But this kind of reboot of, you know, Godzilla running around in the New York subway system and under Madison Square Garden and having all these little baby Godzillas, you know, it just didn't make any sense. It was so far removed from the original that it just, quite frankly, turned silly. That's for you Ferris Bueller's Day Off version of Godzilla. And then the last, and there's some rationale behind this one, but the last one, yes, there was a remake of The Shining. And Kubrick, you know, his film I found to be one of the best horror films out there. And I've mentioned this in another stream, that I just remember seeing that film and being paralyzed with a degree of fear and suspense. But Stephen King actually never really liked the Kubrick version of The Shining, so they decided that they were going to do another remake. And the film was very, very long. And it wasn't even scary, was the biggest problem with it. So for you, Shining, the remake, that's your gift from me. All right, so you got some remakes out there that should have not been made? Let me know. Or what's the best remake that's out there that we should all go check out? Or do you disagree with anything on my list? Let me know and I'll get back to you. And speaking of getting back to you, I'll check back with you in a couple of days with some more news or not news. We do live in a very interesting place. Remember, you matter. I want to keep everybody safe. If you're having any difficulties, go talk to someone. There's somebody out there who's willing to help, and that person will be there for you. So come back, check us out in a couple of days.